The rain hammered Briar Creek Cemetery like bullets against tin. Jack Quinn stood at the edge of the small crowd, water dripping from his black suit jacket onto the muddy ground. 8 years old. That's all Alara had been. 8 years old. And now they were putting her in the ground next to her father. Jack's jaw clenched as he watched Marina Quinn dab at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. His sister-in-law played the grieving mother, perfectly black dress, trembling shoulders, the occasional sob at just the right moments. But Jack had spent 20 years in the Navy learning to read people, and Marina's performance felt rehearsed. The fake tears bothered him most. They came at calculated intervals, never enough to smear her makeup, always timed for maximum effect when neighbors offered condolences. Jack had seen real grief. He'd held dying men in his arms, watched families receive flag-draped coffins. This wasn't grief. This was theater. Such a terrible illness, Mrs. Patterson from down the street whispered to her husband. Poor little thing wasted away so fast. Jack's hands balled into fists. Fast was right. 2 weeks ago, Alara had been healthy, laughing, drawing her pictures. Then suddenly she was sick, confined to her room, and Marina wouldn't let anyone visit. Not even Jack, her own uncle. The fever was too high. Marina had told him over the phone. Doctor says it might be contagious. I can't risk exposing anyone else. But which doctor? When Jack asked for a name, Marina had grown vague, mentioning someone from the next county over. A specialist, she'd said. Someone who understood rare childhood illnesses. We should say our goodbyes, the funeral director announced, his voice barely audible over the rain. The crowd shuffled forward. Jack hung back, watching Marina accept condolences with practiced grace. She caught his eye across the gravesite and offered a weak smile. Thank you for coming, Jack. Ezra would have wanted you here. Jack nodded, but said nothing. Marina's perfume cut through the smell of wet earth expensive, not something a widow with mounting bills should be wearing. The scent was unfamiliar, different from what she'd worn when Ezra was alive. Everything about her seemed different now. Her nails were professionally manicured, her hair freshly styled despite the supposed stress of caring for a dying child. Even her grief seemed too polished, too controlled for a woman who'd lost everything in 6 months. After the service, Jack followed Marina back to the house he'd helped Ezra buy 7 years ago. The place looked different now, cleaner. Several of Ezra's tools had disappeared from the garage, and his workbench sat empty. The beer fridge that had always been stocked with Ezra's favorite brand now held expensive wine. I need to pack up Alara's things, Marina said, pulling off her black gloves. The grief counselor said it might help with closure. A grief counselor Jack had never heard mentioned before. Another expert from out of town, apparently. I'll help, Jack offered. Marina hesitated. That's not necessary. I want to. Something flickered in Marina's eyes before she nodded. Of course. She loved you so much. They climbed the stairs to Alara's room. Jack had to steady himself against the doorframe. The walls were covered with her drawings, horses, flowers, stick figures of the family. One showed a tall man with dark hair labeled Uncle Jack standing next to a smaller figure labeled me. The drawing hit him like a physical blow. Alara had been the light of his life since the day she was born. After their parents died in a car crash when Jack was 19, he'd raised Ezra like his own son. Watching Ezra become a father had been one of Jack's proudest moments. Marina moved through the room efficiently, folding clothes into boxes. Too efficiently, Jack thought. Most parents would linger over each item, remembering moments and milestones. Marina worked like she was cleaning out a storage unit. Jack picked up one of Alara's books, a worn copy of The Secret Garden. The pages felt loose. She read this one every night, Jack said, thumbing through it. Take it, Marina said without looking up. I'm donating most of her books anyway. The casual dismissal of Alara's treasures made Jack's stomach turn. These weren't just books to donate. They were memories, pieces of a little girl's world. But Marina seemed eager to erase every trace of her daughter's existence. Jack turned another page and stopped. The center pages had been carefully cut out, creating a hollow space. Inside lay a folded piece of paper. His heart pounded as he palmed it, slipping it into his jacket pocket. Find something, Marina asked, Jack held up the book, just remembering how much she loved to read. Marina's smile didn't reach her eyes. She was so bright. Too bright for this world, maybe. An odd thing to say about a child who'd supposedly died of illness. Jack excused himself to the bathroom and unfolded the note. Alara's careful handwriting filled the small page. If you're reading this, I'm still alive. Please help me. Mom doesn't know I know her secret. The paper trembled in Jack's hands. He read it 3 more times, memorizing every letter. The handwriting was definitely Alara's. He'd helped her practice writing her name countless times. But when had she written this? And what secret had she discovered? He flushed the toilet and ran water in the sink, buying time to think. When he returned to the bedroom, Marina was zipping up the last box. That was fast, he said. No point dragging it out. Marina straightened, brushing dust from her dress. I need to get these to Goodwill before they close. Jack helped carry the boxes to Marina's car. As they loaded the trunk, he noticed something else. Marina's purse sat open on the passenger seat, and inside he could see the corner of what looked like a boat registration. Planning a trip? He asked, nodding toward the car. Marina slammed the trunk shut. Just trying to stay busy. Grief affects everyone differently. The defensive response told Jack more than Marina probably intended. He made a mental note to find out more about that boat registration. Jack drove home in silence, Alara's note burning in his pocket. His brother Ezra had died 6 months ago in what the police called an accident brake failure on a winding mountain road. But Ezra had been a mechanic, meticulous about car maintenance. He would never drive a vehicle with faulty brakes. The accident had happened on Highway 19, a route Ezra knew by heart. He'd driven that road hundreds of times going to job sites. For his brakes to fail on that particular stretch of curves seemed impossibly unlucky. Now Alara was supposedly dead too, buried so fast Jack barely had time to process the news. Closed casket because Marina claimed the illness had left her unrecognizable. No viewing, no chance for family to say goodbye. Jack parked in his driveway and sat in the darkness. Rain pelted his windshield as pieces of a puzzle began forming in his mind. 2 sudden deaths, 2 rushed funerals, and now a note suggesting Alara was still alive, in the Navy. Jack had learned that coincidences were usually enemy action. This felt like enemy action. He thought about Marina's behavior over the past 6 months. The expensive clothes, the new car, the way she'd push him away whenever he'd tried to help with Alara. At the time, he'd attributed it to grief and stress. Now he wondered if it had been something else entirely. Jack pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Ezra's best friend, Tommy Rodriguez. Tommy had worked with Ezra at the garage and would know better than anyone about his maintenance habits. Tommy? It's Jack Quinn. I need to ask you about Ezra's truck. The next morning, Jack drove to Ivy's Diner on Main Street. The place hadn't changed in 20 years. Red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and the smell of bacon grease that never quite left the air. Ivy Caro worked the morning shift, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger than her 27 years. Jack had known Ivy since she was a teenager working summers at the diner to save money for community college. She'd grown up in foster care, bounced between homes until she aged out of the system. That kind of childhood taught you to notice things others missed. Jack Quinn, she said, refilling his coffee cup. Sorry about your niece. Terrible thing. Yeah. Jack studied Ivy's face. She looked tired, like she'd been working double shifts again. Can I ask you something? Ivy glanced around the nearly empty diner. The breakfast rush had ended, leaving only old-timers nursing coffee and reading newspapers. Shoot, you ever see Marina around town? Before Alara got sick? Ivy's hand paused over the coffee pot. Why do you ask? Just trying to understand what happened. Everything feels rushed. Ivy set the pot down and slid into the booth across from him. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You want the truth? I saw Marina with Clay Sutter a few times. Weeks before your brother died. Jack's pulse quickened. Clay Sutter owned the boatyard on the other side of town. Divorced, flashy, the kind of man who drove a truck worth more than most people's houses. Jack had seen him around town, but never paid much attention. Saw them where? Here, mostly. Late at night, after the dinner crowd left. They sat in the back booth, heads close together like they were planning something. Ivy's voice dropped even lower. And once I saw Alara in Clay's truck. Kid looked scared out of her mind. Jack's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. When was this? Maybe a month ago? I was walking home from my second job at the gas station. Clay was parked outside the elementary school, just sitting there. Alara was in the passenger seat, still as a statue. Something about it felt wrong, you know? Jack's mind raced. A month ago, Alara had still been healthy, still living a normal life. What had she been doing in Clay Sutter's truck? Did you tell anyone? Ivy laughed bitterly. Tell who? Deputy Finch? He's got his head buried so deep in the sand, he might find oil. Most folks in this town prefer not to see what they don't want to see. What else do you know about Clay? Ivy looked around again, making sure they were alone. He's got money, but not the kind that comes from fixing boats. Expensive cars come and go from his place at all hours. People talk about shipments that arrive at night and disappear by morning. What kind of shipments? The kind nobody asks questions about. Clay's got connections, Jack. The type of connections that make problems disappear. Jack finished his coffee and left a $10 tip. As he reached the door, Ivy called out, Jack, be careful. Clay Sutter's got connections you don't want to mess with. Jack spent the afternoon driving through Briar Creek, seeing the town with new eyes. He'd grown up here, knew every street and business, but now he was looking for patterns he'd missed before. Clay's boatyard sat on the Missouri River, a collection of warehouses and docks that seemed too large for the legitimate boat repair business he claimed to run. The property sprawled across 15 acres of prime riverfront, with multiple buildings and what looked like a private dock system. Expensive cars came and went at odd hours, luxury sedans, high-end SUVs, vehicles that belonged to people with serious money. Jack counted 3 security cameras just on the front gate, and he suspected there were more throughout the property. The boats themselves told an interesting story. Most were pleasure craft, yachts and speedboats worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Not the kind of vessels that needed frequent repairs, but exactly the type that could transport valuable cargo without attracting attention. Jack drove past the elementary school, where Ivy had seen Alara in Clay's truck. The building sat on a quiet side street, surrounded by mature trees that would provide cover for someone waiting in a parked vehicle. Perfect spot for someone who wanted to watch without being noticed. That evening, he called Arden Pike, his coworker at the freight company. They'd served together in different units, but had bonded over their shared experience coming home to a world that didn't understand what they'd seen. I need a favor, Jack said when Arden answered. Name it. How are your computer skills these days? Still sharp. What? Jack chose his words carefully. I think my brother's death wasn't an accident. I need help looking into some financial records. Arden was quiet for a moment. In the background, Jack could hear television playing sports highlights. This official or off the books? Off the books. I'll be right over. Arden arrived an hour later with a laptop bag and a serious expression. He'd gained weight since leaving the army, but still carried himself like a soldier. His service dog, a German shepherd named Rex, followed him into Jack's kitchen. What exactly are we looking for? Arden asked, booting up his laptop. Jack told him about the rushed funerals, Marina's behavior, and what Ivy had said about Clay Sutter. He didn't mention Alara's note that information was too dangerous to share yet. Insurance payouts are public record if you know where to look, Arden said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Let's start there. Rex settled beside Arden's chair, his alert eyes tracking every movement. The dog had been trained to detect stress and anxiety, and Jack could see him responding to the tension in the room. IT took 20 minutes to find what they needed. Ezra's life insurance had paid out $500,000 to Marina as the sole beneficiary. The claim had been processed in record time by an adjuster named Vincent Cross. That's fast, Arden muttered. Most insurance companies drag their feet on accidental death claims. They investigate everything twice before paying out. What about Alara? More typing. Another payout. This one for $250,000 from Policy Marina had taken out on Alara just 8 months ago. Same adjuster, same rapid processing. Jesus, Arden breathed. Who takes out a $250,000 policy on an 8-year-old? Jack's jaw tightened. Someone planning to collect. Arden kept digging. Vincent Cross worked for a small claims adjustment firm based in St. Louis. The firm's other clients included several businesses owned by Clay Sutter, including the boatyard. "This stinks," Arden said. "Your sister-in-law gets convenient payouts processed by an adjuster who works for her boyfriend's businesses. Even if it's legal, it's dirty as hell." Jack stood and walked to the window. The rain had stopped, but clouds still blocked the moon. "Ezra's death wasn't an accident, and I don't think Alara's really dead." "What do you mean?" "I think Marina and Clay staged it. Alara's alive somewhere, and they're planning to sell her or worse." Arden closed the laptop. Rex's ears perked up, sensing the shift in mood. "That's a hell of an accusation, Jack. You got proof?" Jack thought about the note hidden in his bedroom. "I'm working on it. What do you need from me?" "Help. This is bigger than I can handle alone." Arden nodded slowly. "You know I'm in, but we need to be smart about this. If you're right, Marina and Clay won't hesitate to add 2 more bodies to their count." They spent the next hour planning their next moves. Arden would continue digging into financial records while Jack conducted physical surveillance. They'd meet every 2 days to share information and adjust their strategy. "One more thing," Arden said as he packed up his laptop. "I did some checking on Clay Sutter's background. Guy's got connections to some serious players. Ever hear of the Kozlov family?" Jack shook his head. "Russian organized crime. They run trafficking operations up and down the Mississippi River. Clay's boatyard would be perfect for their needs, isolated, private docks, legitimate business front." The implications hit Jack like a punch to the gut. If Clay was working with human traffickers, Alara could already be gone, shipped off to buyers who specialized in children. Jack walked Arden to the door. As his friend drove away, Jack felt the familiar weight of a mission settling on his shoulders. In the Navy, he'd learned that successful operations required 3 things: good intelligence, careful planning, and the will to see it through to the end. That he had the will. Now he needed to gather intelligence and build a plan. Marina thought she'd outsmarted everyone, but she'd made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated Jack Quinn. He looked up at the cloudy sky and made a silent promise to his brother and niece. He would find the truth, no matter what it cost. And when he did, Marina would pay for every lie, every tear, every moment of fear she'd caused. The game had begun, and Jack intended to win. 3 days after the funeral, Jack followed Marina to a storage facility on the outskirts of town. She drove slowly, checking her mirrors frequently, but Jack stayed far enough back to avoid detection. He'd spent years tracking enemy movements in hostile territory. Following one woman through Missouri farm country was child's play. The storage facility was one of those self-serve places with minimal security and no on-site staff. Perfect for someone who needed to hide things from prying eyes. Marina parked in front of Unit 47 and disappeared inside for 20 minutes. When she emerged, she carried a small cardboard box and looked nervous, glancing around before driving away. Jack waited until her car disappeared, then approached the facility. The storage units were protected by a simple chain-link fence and basic security cameras. Nothing he couldn't handle. That night, he returned dressed in dark clothes with tools from his garage. The lock on Unit 47 was standard commercial grade. It took him less than 3 minutes to pick it. He slipped inside and closed the door behind him. His flashlight revealed a space crammed with boxes, furniture, and oddly clean items that looked recently placed. Jack moved systematically through the unit, photographing everything with his phone. Most of the boxes contained normal household items: dishes, linens, decorative objects. But in the back corner, he found what he was looking for. Alara's purple backpack sat on top of a box labeled E's Room. Jack unzipped it with trembling hands. Inside were her favorite books, the stuffed rabbit she'd carried everywhere, and a small sketch pad. He flipped through the pages and stopped at a drawing near the back. The picture showed a cabin surrounded by tall trees. 3 trees on the left had red X marks on their trunks. At the bottom, in Alara's careful handwriting, were the words, "My hiding place." Jack's hands shook as he photographed the drawing. This proved Alara had been alive after her supposed death, alive long enough to observe her surroundings and record them. The detail in the drawing suggested she'd spent considerable time at this location. He kept searching. Under a pile of Alara's clothes, he found a photograph of a white yacht. Someone had written Pier 7 in faint pencil on the back. The yacht looked expensive, the kind of vessel that could travel long distances without attracting attention. His flashlight beam caught something else, a child's diary with a small padlock. Jack carefully picked the lock and opened it to the last entry, dated 3 days before Alara's supposed death. Mom thinks I don't know, but I saw her with the boatman. They were talking about taking me on a trip. I don't want to go. I'm scared. Uncle Jack always said if I was in trouble, I should leave a message for him. I hope he finds this. Jack's vision blurred with rage. Alara had known something was wrong. She tried to leave clues, try to reach out for help, and he'd almost missed it. He photographed everything, then carefully replaced each item exactly as he'd found it. Marina couldn't know he'd been here, not yet. He needed more information before making his move. Jack locked the unit and slipped away into the darkness. Back home, he spread the photos across his kitchen table and studied them like battle plans. The cabin could be anywhere within 100 miles of Briar Creek. But the trees in Alara's drawing had a distinctive shape: oak trees, probably along a river or creek where the soil was rich. And the red X marks suggested someone had marked them, perhaps as navigation aids. Jack pulled up satellite maps on his computer and began searching. It took hours, but he finally found a cluster of properties along Blackwater Creek that matched the terrain in Alara's drawing. Most were hunting cabins, isolated and perfect for hiding someone. As dawn broke through his kitchen window, Jack made a decision. He would find that cabin and bring Alara home. But first, he needed backup. Deputy Finch Holler sat behind his desk at the Briar Creek Sheriff's Department, looking like a man who'd given up fighting years ago. His uniform was rumpled, his desk cluttered with half-finished paperwork, and his eyes held the dull resignation of someone who'd learned not to ask uncomfortable questions. The office smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes, despite the no-smoking policy that had been in place for 5 years. Finch's ashtray sat empty on his desk, but the lingering odor suggested he still indulged when no one was watching. "Jack Quinn," Finch said without enthusiasm. "What brings you by?" Jack closed the office door and took the seat across from Finch's desk. "I want to talk about my brother's accident." Finch's shoulders sagged. "Jack, we've been through this. Brake failure happens. Ezra hit that tree going 50 miles an hour. Ezra was a mechanic." Jack interrupted. "He checked his brakes every month. You know that. Sometimes even good mechanics miss things." Jack leaned forward. "What did the brake fluid analysis show?" Finch shifted in his chair. "We didn't do a brake fluid analysis." "Why not?" "Because the case was closed. Accidental death. Insurance pays out. Everyone moves on." Finch's voice carried a warning. "Some rocks are better left unturned, Jack." Jack studied the deputy's face. Finch was scared. That much was obvious. But scared of what? Or whom? What if I told you I have evidence that Alara's still alive? Finch's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. "What kind of evidence?" Jack pulled out his phone and showed Finch the photos from his storage unit. "What about these rocks?" Finch squinted at the screen, his face growing pale as he scrolled through the images. When he reached the drawing of the cabin, his hand stopped moving. "Where did you get these?" "Alara's still alive, Finch. Marina and Clay Sutter are holding her somewhere, probably planning to sell her to human traffickers." Finch set the phone down like it might explode. "You're talking about serious accusations against prominent citizens. Prominent citizens who murder my brother and fake my niece's death." Jack's voice stayed level, but his eyes burned. "How much did they pay you to look the other way?" Finch's face flushed red. "Nobody paid me anything. But Clay Sutter's got connections, Jack. Connections that reach all the way to the state capitol. You start making waves, you might not like where they crash. Are you going to help me or not?" Finch stared at the photos for a long moment. When he looked up, something had changed in his expression. Maybe it was the image of Alara's drawing, or maybe it was his own conscience finally asserting itself. "If you can give me solid proof that girl's alive video, audio, something that would hold up in court, I'll move. But I won't destroy my career on suspicion and circumstantial evidence." Jack pocketed his phone. "Fair enough." As he reached the door, Finch called out, "Jack, be careful. Whatever game you think you're playing, Clay Sutter's been playing it longer." Jack left the sheriff's department and drove to Ivy's diner. The lunch crowd was thinning out, and Ivy looked tired from the rush. She brightened when she saw him. Back again? You're becoming a regular. Jack waited until the last customer left, then showed Ivy the photo of the cabin drawing. You recognize this place? Ivy studied the image carefully. Her finger traced the outline of the trees, and her expression grew thoughtful. Maybe. That tree configuration looks familiar. She grabbed a pen and sketched a rough map on a napkin. There's a hunting cabin about 20 miles north of here, right off Blackwater Creek. Guy named Morrison used to own it, but he died last year. Far as I know, it's been empty since. She looked up at Jack. Why? You think this is where they're keeping Alara? Maybe. Jack folded the napkin and put in his wallet. How do you know about the cabin? Ivy's expression darkened. Because Clay Sutters used it before. Back when I was 18 and stupid, I went to a party out there. Saw things I wish I could forget. Clay's got a side business, moving things that don't want to be moved, if you catch my meaning. Jack caught her meaning perfectly. What kind of things? People mostly. Young people who nobody would miss. Runaways, kids from broken homes, girls who thought they were going to modeling auditions. Ivy's voice grew bitter. Clay's got a network. Brings them to the cabin first, breaks them down, then ships them out on his boats. The implications made Jack's stomach turn. You want to help me stop him? I've been waiting 5 years for someone to ask me that question. The Morrison cabin sat in a grove of oak trees 50 yards from Blackwater Creek. Jack lay in the brush with binoculars, studying the structure as afternoon shadows lengthened. The cabin looked abandoned, peeling paint, sagging porch, windows dark. But fresh tire tracks in the dirt suggested recent visitors. Arden crawled up beside him. See anything? Tire tracks. And look at the trees on the left. Arden adjusted his own binoculars. 3 oak trees bore red spray paint marks on their trunks, exactly as Alara had drawn them. She was here, Jack whispered, that they'd been watching for 3 days, taking shifts and documenting everything. Ivy had provided a detailed map of the area and information about Clay's usual routes. According to her, he preferred to move merchandise at night when the roads were empty. The waiting was the hardest part. Jack's military training had taught him patience, but knowing Alara was somewhere close made every minute feel like an hour. He thought about her diary entry, the fear in her words, and his rage burned steady and cold. Movement, Arden whispered. Jack focused his binoculars on the dirt road leading to the cabin. A white pickup truck appeared through the trees. Clay's truck, the same one Ivy had seen Alara in weeks. AGO.AS darkness fell. Jack set up his camera with night vision capability. If Marina and Clay came tonight, he'd have evidence that even Finch couldn't ignore. The camera was military grade, capable of recording clear video and audio from 100 yards away. 11:47 p.m. Headlights appeared on the dirt road. Jack activated the camera and focused the lens. The white pickup truck pulled up to the cabin, definitely Clay's vehicle, with a distinctive dent in the rear bumper that Jack had memorized during his surveillance. Clay got out first, looking around nervously before walking to the passenger side. He opened the door and helped someone out, a small figure in a pink jacket. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. Alara. She was alive, walking on her own, but her movements seemed sluggish. Drugged, maybe, to keep her compliant. Marina emerged from the driver's side, checking her watch. She said something to Clay, pointing toward the creek. Clay nodded and guided Alara toward the cabin. Through the camera's audio pickup, Jack heard Marina's voice. We need to move fast. The boat leaves at midnight, and if we miss it, the buyer won't wait. Clay's response was muffled, but Jack caught the words Pier 7 and 1 hour. Jack's blood turned to ice. They were moving Alara tonight. Whatever they had planned, this was the end game. That he activated the emergency contact he'd programmed into his phone, a direct line to Finch's personal cell. The deputy answered on the second ring. This better be good, Jack. It's happening right now. Morrison cabin off Blackwater Creek. I've got Marina and Clay with Alara, and they're talking about a boat at Pier 7. You've got maybe an hour before they disappear forever. Silence on the other end. Then, you're sure it's her? I'm looking right at her. Pink jacket, same height, same hair. It's Alara. Sending backup now. Do not engage, Jack. I mean it, stay put and wait for support. Jack ended the call and focused the camera again. Marina, and Clay were loading Alara back into the truck. The little girl stumbled, and Clay had to catch her arm to keep her upright. "Come on, Finch," Jack muttered, watching the truck's taillights disappear down the dirt road. "Don't let me down now." State police cruisers blocked Highway 63, 3 miles south of Briar Creek. Deputy Finch stood beside his patrol car, radio in hand, coordinating the roadblock. Jack watched from a distance as Clay's white pickup truck appeared around the curve, headlights cutting through the darkness. The roadblock was perfectly positioned at a choke point where the highway narrowed between two hills. Clay would have no choice but to stop or crash into the barriers the police had set up. The truck slowed, then stopped as Clay realized he was trapped. Red and blue lights painted the night in shifting colors, and officers emerged from their vehicles with weapons drawn. "Driver, exit the vehicle with your hands visible," came the amplified command. Clay's door opened slowly. He stepped out with his hands raised, but his eyes darted left and right, looking for an escape route. There wasn't one. The police had chosen their position well. "Passenger, exit the vehicle." Marina climbed out of the passenger side, her composed mask finally cracking. Even from a distance, Jack could see the fear in her movements. This wasn't the confident woman who'd played grieving widow so convincingly. "There's a child in the back seat." Finch's voice carried across the night air. "We need paramedics." Two officers approached the truck, while others kept weapons trained on Marina and Clay. One officer opened the rear door and leaned inside. Moments later, he emerged carrying a small figure wrapped in a blanket. Alara. Alive. Jack's knees almost gave out. She looked pale and unsteady, but she was breathing, moving alive. The officer carried her to a waiting ambulance while paramedics checked her vital signs. "She's responsive," one of the paramedics called out. "Pulse is steady, breathing normal. Looks like she's been sedated." Finch walked over to where Jack waited by the tree line. "She's drugged but stable. Looks like they've been giving her something to keep her docile." "What about Marina and Clay?" "Arrested on charges of kidnapping, conspiracy, insurance fraud, and suspicion of murder in your brother's death. The state's taking over the investigation." Jack watched as officers handcuffed Marina and led her to a patrol car. She looked across the chaos of lights and uniforms until her eyes found his. For a moment, their gazes locked across 30 yards of darkness. But Marina's expression shifted from fear to rage. She knew. She understood that Jack had orchestrated everything, had outmaneuvered her at every turn. Her lips moved, but the distance was too great to hear the words. Jack didn't need to hear them. The hatred in her eyes said everything. As the patrol car pulled away with Marina in the back seat, Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Alara was safe. The nightmare was over. But the legal battle was just beginning. The Briar Creek courthouse hadn't seen this much excitement in decades. Media vans lined the street, and reporters fought for position as the case that had gripped the state moved toward its conclusion. Jack sat in the front row of the gallery, wearing his best suit and the expression of a man who'd waited his entire life for this moment. Marina Quinn entered in an orange jumpsuit, her hands cuffed, her once perfect appearance reduced to prison pallor and hollow cheeks. 6 months in county lockup had stripped away her veneer of sophistication, revealing the desperate woman underneath. The transformation was startling. Gone was the grieving widow in designer clothes. In her place sat a woman who looked every bit the criminal she'd become. Her hair hung limp and unwashed. Her skin bore the gray pallor of someone who rarely saw sunlight, and her eyes darted nervously around the courtroom. Clay Sutter sat at a separate defense table. He'd accepted a plea bargain 2 weeks earlier, agreeing to testify against Marina in exchange for a reduced sentence. The smart move, but it had sealed Marina's fate. The state calls Jack Quinn to the witness stand. Jack rose and walked to the front of the courtroom. The bailiff administered the oath, and Jack placed his hand on the Bible, looking directly at Marina as he swore to tell the truth. District Attorney Rebecca Walsh approached the witness stand. She was young but thorough, the kind of prosecutor who built cases like cathedrals one careful stone at a time. "Mr. Quinn, please tell the court about the events following your niece's funeral." Jack spoke clearly, his Navy training keeping his voice steady and factual. He described finding the note in Alara's book, the investigation with Arden, the evidence in the storage unit. The jury listened with rapt attention as he laid out the timeline of deception and murder. You filmed the defendants at the Morrison cabin on the night of the arrest. Yes, ma'am. What did you hear them say? Jack turned to look directly at Marina. The defendant, Marina Quinn, told Clay Sutter that they needed to move fast because the boat left at midnight, and if they missed it, the buyer wouldn't wait. Marina's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. The recorded audio had already been admitted as evidence. The buyer, Mr. Quinn. What did you understand that to mean? That my niece was being sold to human traffickers. The words hung in the courtroom like a physical presence. Several jurors looked sick. One woman in the back row covered her mouth with her hand. Walsh continued her questioning, walking Jack through each piece of evidence, each careful step that had led to Marina's exposure. When she finished, Marina's defense attorney approached for cross-examination. Mr. Quinn, isn't it true that you harbored deep resentment toward my client? Yes. The honest answer seemed to surprise the lawyer. You wanted revenge, didn't you? I wanted justice. Same thing, isn't it? Jack considered the question. No. Revenge is personal. Justice is what's right. But you took the law into your own hands. I gathered evidence and turned it over to law enforcement. That's called being a good citizen. The cross-examination lasted another hour, but the defense attorney couldn't shake Jack's testimony. The evidence was too solid, the timeline too clear. Clay took the stand next, his voice shaking as he described the conspiracy. Marina had approached him months before Ezra's death, proposing a plan to collect on both insurance policies. Clay's maritime connections would help them sell Alara overseas before anyone realized she was still alive. She said it would be easy money, Clay testified. Kill Ezra, fake the kid's death, collect the insurance, and sell her to people who wouldn't ask questions. Clean and simple. How did you kill Ezra Quinn? Walsh asked. Brake fluid. Marina distracted him while I drained his brake lines. Made it look like gradual failure, but when he hit those mountain curves. Clay's voice trailed off. Tell the court about Alara. How long was she held at the Morrison cabin? 3 weeks. Marina said the kid was smart, kept trying to escape. We had to keep her sedated most of the time. The jury looked horrified. Several members stared at Marina with undisguised disgust. The testimony continued for 2 days. Expert witnesses explained the insurance fraud, medical experts testified about the drugs found in Alara's system, and law enforcement officers described the evidence found at the cabin. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood with the verdict in his hand. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Marina's face went white. On the charge of kidnapping in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Her lawyer grabbed her arm as she swayed. On the charge of insurance fraud, we find the defendant guilty. The judge's gavel fell like a hammer blow. Marina Quinn had been convicted on all counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Judge Martinez had a reputation for harsh penalties in crimes against children, and Marina's case had pushed every one of his buttons. The courtroom was packed again, but this time Jack brought Alara. She sat beside him in a blue dress, her hair in pigtails, looking like any normal 8-year-old. The months of therapy had helped, but Jack could still see the shadows in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. The trauma would take years to heal completely. Alara had nightmares, moments of panic when someone approached too quickly, a wariness that broke Jack's heart. But she was alive, and with time and love, she would recover. Marina Quinn, Judge Martinez began, you have been convicted of some of the most heinous crimes this court has ever seen. You murdered your husband for money. You faked your daughter's death and planned to sell her into slavery. You showed no regard for human life, no maternal instinct, no decency whatsoever. Marina stood between her lawyers, her orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the expensive clothes she'd worn during her crimes. I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The gavel fell. Marina's legs buckled, and her lawyers had to support her weight. In the gallery, Jack felt Alara's small hand slip into his. Is it over, Uncle Jack? It's over, sweetheart. As court officers led Marina away, she turned for one last look at the gallery. Her eyes found Jack's, and this time he stood up. He leaned forward just enough for her to see his lips move. You'll die in there, and you'll know I put you there. Marina's composure finally broke. She screamed something unintelligible as the officers dragged her toward the door. The sound echoed through the courtroom until the heavy door swung shut behind her. Clay received 40 years for his cooperation, but even with good behavior, he'd be an old man before he saw freedom again. Vincent Cross, the insurance adjuster, was convicted on federal fraud charges and received 15 years a month later. Jack stood in his kitchen making breakfast for Alara. She sat at the table drawing in her sketchpad horses this time, not hiding places. The framed copy of her birth certificate hung on the wall where he could see it every morning. The nightmares were coming less frequently now. Alara was sleeping through the night more often, laughing at cartoons, asking for bedtime stories. The resilience of children never ceased to amaze him. Uncle Jack, Alara looked up from her drawing. Why did Mom do those bad things? Jack set down the spatula and sat across from her. He'd known this question would come eventually, and he'd prepared for it. Some people care more about money than they do about the people who love them. Your mom was one of those people, but she said she loved me. I know she did, and that makes what she did even worse. Alara nodded solemnly, then returned to her drawing. Jack watched her work, marveling at her strength. She would carry scars from this experience for the rest of her life, but she would also carry the knowledge that someone had fought for her, that she was worth fighting for. That afternoon, a process server delivered papers to Jack's door. Marina was appealing her conviction, claiming ineffective counsel and prosecutorial misconduct. Jack read the documents and smiled grimly. Let her appeal. Let her cling to whatever hope she could find in her concrete cell. The evidence was solid, the conviction would stand, and Marina Quinn would spend the rest of her life paying for what she'd done. Jack walked to Alara's room and knocked on the doorframe. She looked up from her books, and for the first time in months, her smile reached her eyes. Your mom will never hurt you again, he said quietly. I made sure of it. Alara nodded and returned to her reading. Outside, the sun was setting over Briar Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Justice had been served, the guilty had been punished, and an innocent child was safe. That it was enough.